Hi, everybody. Fantastic to see you here for the second session of this special edition mini-series within the UWC Unlocked Talks. As I'm sure you all know by now, the series is called Meeting at the Crossroads, a dialogue on race relations. And just a reminder that these sessions are a bit longer than the usual Unlocked format, where it's an hour. So this meeting is an hour and a half. Of course, if you have to leave, we completely understand, but just we wanted to ensure that there's as much time for discussion as possible, so that's why it's a bit longer. All right, so this mini-series is organized and led by three amazing alumni, Tamaisha Eitel, who you saw yesterday, some of you that were on the call, Dr. Rachel Thwaites-Williams, who you will see today, and Juan Antonio Nelson, who we will see tomorrow. Celia and I are on hand to answer any of the technical questions you may have. So just send those directly to either of us at any time throughout the call. And as with all of the Unlocked Talks, please keep yourselves on mute during the presentation unless you're called upon by the moderator or are added to the speakers list. If you have a question to ask, please write it in the chat or send it directly to Rachel, and we will try to call on as many of you as possible. If you don't wish to ask your question out loud, but you still want to indicate a comment or your question, just indicate that the question is just kind of a comment and you don't want to say it out loud, and then we won't call on you. But we really encourage you to comment and add questions and talk in the chat, as there's a lot of useful and really interesting conversation that happens there too. And just when you are speaking, we please ask you to keep in mind time, just because there are so many people on this call, which is great, and we want to hear from as many voices as possible. So on the topic of the discussion period, I just want to give a quick note on safeguarding. We may be touching on some deeply emotional topics, so please take care of yourself, and if anything becomes too much, feel free to leave the meeting at any time without any explanation necessary. And if you have an incident of racism or racial discrimination at UWC to report, please feel free to contact your school or UWC-IO through the safeguarding section of uwc.org, which Celia is just going to link into the chat, and we can make that available to you anytime if you want that link, and we'll link it again at the end of the talk. So if you have questions about anything that I just mentioned, please let myself or Celia know anytime. We're here to answer all your questions. And with that, that's all the housekeeping. It is my pleasure to announce our moderator for the day. Rachel is a UWC-USA alumna from 2001 to 2003 from Jamaica. She attended the University of the West Indies, where she received her MD in family medicine. In addition to being a family practice physician currently, she is also the author of a beautiful children's book called What Do the Stars Do When It's Time to Go to Bed, which I really invite you to check out. It's really gorgeous. She is joining us today from St. Lucia, and we're so appreciative that she could take the time out of her busy life to spearhead organizing this series, and that she will be gracing us by moderating today's session. So enough from me, over to you, Rachel. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Thank you for the lovely introduction. It's so weird to hear about yourself from other people. Guys, I am a little nervous, bear with me, but we're gonna make it through today. I think today, it sounds like it may be difficult, but I think it may be, fine. I think we're gonna all come out of this quite fine and quite okay. As Sarah said, my name is Rachel Thwaites-Williams, and I'm the moderator for today's session, which is Meeting at the Crossroads, a dialogue on race relations. And as she said as well, I'm hail from the beautiful island of Jamaica, and I went to UWC-USA, yes, UWC-USA, class of 2003. And I love UWC. I had an amazing experience when I was there. It was an amazing 2 years. I learned a lot about myself. I learned a lot about the world. I learned a lot about different cultures and religions. I made friends for life. Nowhere is perfect, but it was an amazing experience. And I still had a bit of nostalgia, even now, how many years later. And recently I joined the UWC alumni Facebook group just to keep my finger on the pulse of what other alumni are doing. And it's always been a pleasant forum, really. But of late, 2020 has sent us a lot of curveballs and a lot of emotional baggage. But of late, it kind of changed a bit. It became a bit heavier in the group because since the death of George Floyd in the US, there has been a revitalization or resurfacing of the Black Lives Matter movement in the United States, and that has spilled over across the globe. Black people across the globe are protesting and are having discussions, and that's just a way of trying to heal, because it actually hurts on a certain level. Even though I don't know George Floyd, I did cry. It's because for the Black community. I don't want to speak for everybody, but I suspect that it is a culmination of whether overt racism that you may have experienced in your life or the everyday microaggressions, and it just feels like one after the other. And I guess at this point, it just felt like the pot boiling over, and people are just looking for somewhere to talk, somewhere to speak about their emotions. And one of the, either if it's not protesting, it's speaking in safe spaces like with family and good friends. And what better family is there than your UWC family? So a lot of Black alumni did express their hurt and so on the Facebook forum. And while there was a lot of support, there was also a bit of defensiveness, and certain things spiraled out of where they should have been. And I'm not saying anybody's at fault, because honestly, Facebook is not the greatest space to have a personal one-on-one conversation about racism. You know, you're not going to get much back and forth, meaningful dialogue there. And so I remember I called Tamaisha and I said, Tamaisha, I think we need a space to talk. We really need a space to talk. And Tamaisha was like, if you know Tamaisha, yes, yes. And so she went ahead, she pushed through this, and I want to thank her for everything that she did to make this happen. I want to thank Sarah, Celia, and Rebecca for helping to organize this. You guys were amazing, have been amazing. I want to thank the UWC-IO for recognizing the need for this forum and for this space, a safe space for people, everyone, to talk about how they're feeling at the moment. And most importantly, I want to thank the panelists that have come here today to make themselves vulnerable and talk about their own experiences and other things. They're going to come with suggestions as well from their own unique perspectives. And I'm very happy to be a part of this and to be moderating this today. So I want to introduce you to our three panelists. The first panelist is Kathryn Day. Kathryn, I don't know if you want to wave so people can see who you are. Just wave. So Kathryn.
And wave.
Yeah,
hey.
And wave. So this is Kathryn. Kathryn grew up in Palo Alto, California, and attended the Atlantic College from 73 to 75. After graduating from Stanford with an English degree, she moved to the UK to work with South American monkeys for many years. In 2002, she returned to UC Berkeley to train as a school psychologist and earned a PhD in human development, adopting a cultural and historical lens. She did her dissertation work in South Africa, working with the rural Zulu children and teenagers, and she's currently working in the San Francisco Bay Area with schools. So thanks, Kathryn. Our next presenter, our other panelist is Yola. Yola, I don't know if you want to wave.
Hello. Hi.
Hi, Yola. Yola Mzizi, I hope I pronounced that correctly, is a recent alumna of the United World College of Mostar from 2017 to 2019. She's originally from Durban, South Africa, but currently resides in Chicago, Illinois, in the United States. And she attends the Northwestern University and is pursuing her degrees in global health and sociology with a certificate in political science. So we're very happy to have her today to give her own unique perspective. And our third and final panelist and presenter is Jordon. Jordon, you want to wave for us, please?
Hi, everyone.
He's from the best island in the Caribbean. A joke. I lie. A joke. He's from Jamaica. What can I say? And he went to Robert Bosch College from 2015 to 2017, and he will be doing a really awesome presentation today. So I expect that this is going to be a pretty nice conversation, and feel free to ask questions. You can type them in the chat area, and after each person has spoken, if you want to ask questions, I will just open the floor as we go, making sure we keep to time. Alrighty. So first, I would like to open the floor for Kathryn. Kathryn's just going to tell us a little bit about herself and her experience at UWC.
Okay, and so we did a little bit of sharing yesterday, I think, so prior to setting all this up to get to know each other. And one of the things that really stood out for me was like how diverse our experience was before we actually landed at Atlantic College. And as I grew up in California, that's Stanford's university town. We were one of the only Black families in my neighborhood. I grew up it was diverse in terms of there was immigrants, Jews, Asians, but actually Palo Alto had been redlined and was still being redlined when we moved there. We were integrating one of the first neighborhoods in the town. And also my parents never talked about race. And so I had all these unanswered questions about race and who I was and what was going on. And that was part of the reason that I went to Atlantic College in the first place, because I felt I was just, I felt that I'd grown up in a bubble and I wanted a much broader kind of experience. And so I arrived at Atlantic College with all that kind of bubbling along in the background and a fair amount of anxiety about what I let myself in for and what I was coming to. And in the first day or two, I was at my house, standing outside the common room, and I heard this other student talking. He was one of the other American students on campus, and he was like, "Oh my gosh, have you seen like this kid from California?" I'm like, "I thought he was going to be this wonderful blonde," and I was like, "Oh really?" And around that time, the second years had put together a paper ranking all the girls, like ranking the first year girls, like according to how attractive they were. And I was like, oh my God, this place is like, a, like a place like where you go to bid for animals and things like that. Like it was so, like I felt it was like terribly degrading. And there's a racist element to it. And those things like fused and made, for me, like a terrible kind of first impression. And because no one spoke to or refuted what that student had said, I felt hurt, I felt excluded, and looked at the whole thing and said, again, like, where have I arrived? What kind of place is this? Before they, they're judging you and your physical characteristics before they even speak to you or treat you as a human being, or get to know you in any shape, manner, or form. And so that made a pretty deep impression on me. And subsequently to that, I think, like when we were sharing before, like I think that there's a lot of common shared ground about comments about, kind of superficial comments about our personal appearance, about our physical appearance, about the things that set us apart and make us different. And in my case, it was, and people look at me and they sort of think, is she Black? Is she not Black? Is she just kind of this Asian-y sort of whatever kind of chick? I'm biracial. I'm African-American, Native American, and white in like more or less kind of equal kind of blending. And that seemed to kind of confuse a lot of people. But they could make comments about my hair. And one of the things that I realized looking back was how like a lack of privacy which is supposed to be a good thing at boarding at the UWC colleges, can backfire in terms of not affording minority students any refuge. If you get up and you kind of wander off into the bathroom, like half asleep as we do, and you have the resident bully who makes some kind of comment about how fuzzy your hair is or how disheveled you look or something like that, and that plus, what is the plus for many students of just being able to have like that that close contact, like in everyday progress, like in our case, can really kind of roll backward if we feel that we're vulnerable and that we're not protected against these microaggressions or macroaggressions, as you might say. How are we doing for time? Anyone?
You're doing well. You have 4 more minutes.
4 more minutes. Okay.
If you don't want to, if you want to use them, great. If you don't want to, I can always go to Yola.
And
Whatever
so
makes you feel good.
no, okay. And for me, those kind of comments, like in a public-private space, are just completely unacceptable, and yet they seem to be like a really common experience for Black students. When I got home, my brother said, "Oh, you've changed, but not for the better. Is like your voice is kind of fainter. You seem kind of troubled." And I think that was accurate, because at Atlantic College, I was learning to dissociate from my surroundings because I couldn't get any privacy. And some of the time I really just checked out. And that was a sign of, that was a sign that environment was just not acceptable, like on some levels, and that it was diminishing me, like rather than kind of bringing me out and making me stronger. And I think that because Atlantic College presents, like in terms of idealistic promises, to be let down and disappointed at a UWC is worse than going to a high school where you don't have any pretensions or expectations of this is the world as it should be. This is some kind of like ideal place. These kinds of these years of adolescence are really critical, to healthy psychic development. You have to be able to attend to your own identity and values and goals. And for me, I did find places during those 2 years where I could do that, but it was not at the UWC. Like you need mentors, you need certain like cultural resources, and I felt that I really benefited. Like, and there's a lot of things about the UWC that I really loved. But in terms of purely like in terms of being a Black student, I think it was damaging. In terms of the curriculum, I know that, are we out of time?
Yes, a little bit. I don't mean to cut you, because honestly, I really appreciate you opening up so much to all of us at the moment. That was a really brave thing to do. And we have more time to talk about I'm going to ask you questions. I think you're going to talk about education, what to do about education. I will make sure to come back to you about what we can do in the education system. Is that okay?
Oh yeah, of course.
Okay, Kathryn, thank you so much for sharing that. I know that must have been really difficult, and I'm pretty sure you're not the only person that has gone through that. I myself have gone through something similar, but it's not about me today. The next person that I want to introduce to us and to tell her story is Yola. Yola, you ready?
Yeah, hi, I'm Yola, and I went to UWC Mostar between 2017 and 2019. And Kathryn, I wish I could tell you that things have changed in the 45 years since you've graduated, but not at all. Actually, I feel as if in my experience, things have gotten slightly worse. So to tell you about my Black experience at UWC, I will do it sort of like chronologically. So when I arrived in Mostar, the first thing that struck out to me was being asked to take a placement test in English, which I understand that it's a standard procedure. Like everybody should take a placement test, so you can like figure out what level of English you're at, or like what level of mathematics you're at. However, it was all the North American students, like US, Canada, but not Mexico, UK students, Australia, New Zealand, were not asked to take this exam because they're just expected to speak English because they come from English-speaking countries. But I'm from South Africa, and South Africa is an English-speaking country, but immediately people thought that I could not speak English. So that was the first thing that struck out to me. And of course, I was very disappointed with UWC Mostar in terms of just like leadership and how things were taken care of, or like not even taken care of. But that aside, with just my Black experience, because Mostar does not have a campus and we live in the city, so we interact with the locals of the city almost all the time, and the city is very divided. And it's also a very terrible place for a person of color to live, because you're just walking down the street and you see swastikas everywhere. You have people who yell at you all the time, almost every single day. And at some point I had to start wearing headphones and listen to podcasts. And that's how I got into podcasts, which is now my favorite hobby. But how that came about was because I was trying to shut out all of these things that people were saying. You are constantly stared at, and it is made known that you are different and you're not supposed to be there. And sometimes it would escalate to not even like microaggressions, where people would actually follow you home to the residences, would try to touch your hair, would take photos of you without your consent. And that was just terrible. And that's just the outside of like UWC. That's just like the city. But within UWC in itself, you also have that. Like you had officials and like people who are in like higher rankings, and like we had all these big donor meetings where all of these very important people would come, and we expected to put on a show. And the students of color get their photos taken without their consent and told that, oh, this is what will make the school money. When journalists come for like the photo ops or for press, we are expected to speak on behalf of like the rest of the school. And I cannot count the number of times I've been asked to talk to a journalist to talk about UWC Mostar. And when I would want to talk about all the bad things, they would tell me this is a positive story, so maybe only share the positive things. Well, there were very few positive things to share. And I realized that there were very few positive things to share when I was talking to one of my closest friends who also went to UWC Mostar, when we went to uni, because we go to uni together now. And people would ask us, like, how was your study abroad experience? How was high school? And we'd have completely different experiences, because it seemed as if we were attending completely different schools. And towards the end of my first year, I was very tired, honestly, and I got to go home to South Africa for like over a year, because I couldn't go home during winter break. And I remember talking to my family members, telling them that I do not want to go back. However, I wasn't allowed to not go back, because being from South Africa and being a student of color, you already have you have such limited resources with what you can do. And the national committee and everybody makes it seem like this is your one shot of being able to do whatever you want to. So it was just as if it was like an experience that was packaged as like, you know what, you just have to be patient, just get through it. It's one more year. But the following year was honestly way worse, maybe because I just was more aware of these things, and I had the vocabulary to articulate my thoughts and to tell people that this is not okay, whilst I could not do that in my first year because I was also unaware of what was happening. And I come from South Africa, and we have a terrible history of like racism, but anything that I've experienced in Europe is just unlike any other. In my second year, I met some fabulous people, and with the experience just becoming worse and worse within the school and outside of the school, where you get faculty who honestly say really terrible things in class, and then we are meant to just brush it off. Sometimes really derogatory things, and we are not meant to speak up or say anything. Where students say terrible things, but the professors don't correct them, and we're just meant to be okay with it. And so yes, I met some great people, and we decided to form a Students of Color Union, because we were tired of being told that it was our fault whenever we tried to bring things up. We were tired of being told that it is our fault for not being open enough, for not allowing other people to learn about us, when that whole learning procedure is actually very detrimental, and I refuse to participate in my own dehumanization. So we formed the Students of Color Union, and you know things are bad when you have to unionize. So with that, that was also the first year where Mostar had its African Culture Week, because before that, in the previous year, in my second year, there was only one African student. So you can tell the amount of support that we had, where we only had one African student in my second years, and there were no Black faculty. There were no Black people in the school other than the students, essentially. Like the administration and the faculty, the diversity there did not match the diversity of the students, and there was no support whatsoever. I would like to say there was some, but honestly, there was none. And that first year, when we formed the African Culture Week for the first time, we decided that we wanted to talk about our experiences of racism. However, that went terribly, because people would tell us again that it is our fault. When we would talk about how this is problematic, people would tell us that we are dividing the community, that we should stop talking about it because here everybody loves each other. So that was my experience. And I finally graduated, and I was so excited to graduate. And I know, like, because the IB is very difficult. But with that, I was just mostly excited and very happy to leave Mostar. Of course, I made fabulous friends, and I had really strong relationships there, and those are friends for life. And I met some faculty who I still keep in touch with. But I said to myself before I left that I am never going back to Bosnia, and I stand by that decision unless if things change, which I don't think they will anytime soon. And I still keep in touch with the Students of Color Union, which is still organized till today. And when we talk amongst this union, because I'm still a part of it, it's very sad to see that not much has changed, even though the school has tried to do anti-racism training. But then if you even think about the circumstances that led to that, when they first expected us, the students, to find someone to speak. Me, a 17-year-old, is expected to find someone who's qualified to speak on race and racial inequality, when I myself cannot articulate the harm and abuse that I have faced. So yeah, and I just think that UWC, we definitely need to do better. And I know these experiences are very valid, but they definitely point to larger structural issues that have been ignored since UWC's founding. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yola. That was really powerful. I want to thank you for that, because I'm sure that that was not easy to say. You were very articulate, and it's hard to hear, I'm sure. I'm sure that was difficult for some. It's hard to hear, but the thing is that if you didn't care, you wouldn't even have come on this forum. It's because you actually care about UWC, you care about the students that are there now, and that you would like to see some sort of change. And I think the only way that you can have effective change is you have to acknowledge that something may be wrong first before you can actually do something about it. So Yola, you were super brave, really brave to say what you said, and I really, really appreciate you doing that. I want to welcome the third panelist from Jamaica, Jordon. Jordon is going to do a presentation for us, and then after the presentation and he's speaking, I'm going to open the floor to questions, and I also have a few questions as the moderator myself. Before I get there though, I just want to let you know, Sarah, I would like to give them the poll. We have a small poll for you to complete if you want to. It's completely anonymous. It asks just, I think, 3 questions. We ask about do we ask the first one, Sarah, about race? Did we take that out?
We took the first one out.
Yeah, we took the first one out, right. But we asked them basically if you have had any experience with racism, or if you saw any acts of racism while you were at UWC. It's just take a quick poll, and then we just look at the results afterwards, just to get an idea of where we are as a group, as an alumni. So yes, I want to, without further ado, no more chatting, Rachel. Over to Jordon.
All right. Hi, everyone. I am just setting this up. My name is Jordan. As Rachel said, let me go back here. Jordan, I went to RBC, Robert Bosch College in Germany. I was a member of the second generation of students to ever attend this college. It was a new college. And so I was a member of the second generation. And, largely speaking, generally speaking, my experience at RBC and at UWC was good, right? Looking back, I can't say it was the worst thing that's ever happened to me. But I also can't say it's the best thing that's ever happened to me. And in particular, it's not the best racial experience I've ever had. For me, race wasn't a thing, right? It wasn't a thing at RBC. And coming from Jamaica, which is a predominantly Black country, and predominantly very diverse country, right? Like our national motto is out of many, one people. And so I wasn't introduced to this idea of race. In fact, my first experience at racism was during my time in Germany. It was the end of my it was during the winter break of my second year, and some friends and I visited Strasbourg. We went to a Christmas market. I'm fluent in French. I speak French among other languages, and I was, looking around a Christmas store, and this French, she was the owner of the store, but this French woman, in French, she apparently thought I was a refugee, as if that mattered. But she said something. She says in French, "You Black man, you people never know what you want. That's why you never get anywhere in life. Hurry up or get out." Right? And of course, I speak French. So I acknowledged the fact that I understood very well what she said, and being the Jamaican that I am, I responded accordingly. And for me, it was a mind-blowing experience. Not just that experience, but the reaction to it. I went back to RBC, and I was talking to some friends, and they're like, "Oh, you're just making a big deal out of it," or they were like, "Oh, stop looking for things where they aren't," right? And so my experience with race was one of what I'll get into my presentation, a colorblind one, right? It was one that I think defines UWC as an institution approach to race. And it's one that I think is very problematic. And so a lot of my sort of experience with race is going to come out in the presentation that I'm going to give. And so I'll just jump right into it. So these are some of the things I'm planning on covering in the presentation. Of course, it's not exclusively, the discussion of anti-Blackness and race at UWC isn't exclusive to these, 6 points, but these are some things that I thought were important to point out. And so just to give a little bit more information about me, my name, I use he, him, his pronouns, from Jamaica. I'm currently at Whitman College in Walla Walla, Washington, where I am pursuing a double bachelor's in politics and race and ethnic studies, and I'm minoring in French and music. And then it is my hope to go on to Yale Law, where I'll practice law. So I'm speaking it into being, as my mom would say. Okay. Before I jump into the presentation, my work in social justice activism and in race and ethnic studies, there's a whole lot of vocabulary. And there's a whole lot of things that, if you don't understand, it's very hard to engage. And so I thought I would just share some keywords and their definitions, so that people know that when I use these words, this is what I'm referring to. And so race, whenever I think of race, I'm thinking of, the ways in which we group people based on some physical or social qualities. And so if you think of, race, it's usually skin tone, right? You're Black, you're white, you're whatever. And then ethnicity, especially in the US, it's sort of lumped into race, which is a very interesting thing. You know, and same in Europe, people won't say you're a Black man, they will say your heritage or your culture, or, you know, they will use some other word to refer to race, but they're still referring to a racial category. And so ethnicity, when I use ethnicity in this presentation, it's going to be referring to, you know, a common nationality or cultural tradition. If you think of Hispanics, if you think of, you know, some sort of nationality or region, so I'm Caribbean, that would be some sort of my ethnicity. And then when I use racism in this context, I'm looking at specifically systemic power and privilege that is distributed according to a racialized hierarchy, right? And it's very important that I point out that it's systemic, it's power, and it's privilege, right? And I'm going to differentiate between racism and prejudice, which is preconceived opinions that are not based on reason or actual experience, right? And prejudice, anyone can have prejudice, right? Black folks can have prejudice, racialized folks can have prejudices, but it's very different from racism, right? Prejudice is often absent power and privilege. It's often absent that historical and systemic context, which racism has, right? And so this idea of reverse racism, if you're a Black person in RBC, it's often used to counter anything you say. You're like, oh, you bring up something and people will be like, well, you are reverse racist. You're making this about race, right? Reverse racism does not exist, right? Because reverse racism would argue that people of color have that systemic power and privilege, which we don't, right? We have prejudice, right? So you could say reverse prejudice or just prejudice, but for you to say reverse racism, that is historically and politically inaccurate. So I just wanted to differentiate between those three and use them to sort of guide our discussion. BIPOC, this refers to Black, Indigenous, people of color. Right? And so, especially in the United States, the context of the United States race relations, there was a talk yesterday, so I'm sorry if I'm repeating many of these things, but it's sort of all melanated people, right? People with some sort of color in their tone, in their skin tone, are kind of lumped together. And so Black, Indigenous, and people of color is that BIPOC term. Color blindness and affirmative action are going to be really key to our discussion. So colorblind society, you don't take note of race. You know, you sort of say we're all equal. We don't need, you know, why are you bringing up race, right? And then on the other hand, affirmative action, legally speaking, you know, that was sort of, you know, came out of the Brown versus Board of Education in the US, and sort of how institutions need to take note of race because of the historical implications of race on racialized bodies. And so those, I will use those as sort of opposites in this discussion. And then PWI, predominantly white institutions. We usually refer to institutions that are made up of approximately 51% or more white students and or faculty. And so I go to a PWI, a predominantly white institution, Whitman College. And then when I say DEI, I'm referring to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So since we've gotten that all out of the way, just a quick disclaimer, I am a singular Black man, right? And so I know that the topic is called the Black experience at UWC, but obviously if people were to think that the three of us, me, Yola, and Kathryn, could, you know, talk extensively on the Black experience of UWC, of every single Black alumni, that would be very mistaken of them, right? And so I just want to put it out there. It's not my goal to talk on behalf of every single Black person. Instead, I'm giving voice to my experience and those of my Black siblings who have not had the best time in this community when it comes to race. And I intend to shed some light on our grievances with the sincere hope for equitable change. And so I'm hoping that, we'll go away from this not just saying, oh, Jordon and Yola and Kathryn, we just talked and it was good hearing our experiences, but we can't do anything, right? I'm hoping that as a movement, we're going to be committed to some equitable change. And so I just want to put that out there. It's a disclaimer. I'm not in any way, shape, or form going to say I can describe the entire Black experience. I cannot. So just putting that out there, I think that's important. And so let's jump into it. So when I think of UWC, I think of a sort of antagonism between the utopia and realism, right? UWC, in my opinion, is very much a utopian sort of, it has a utopian approach, right? When I was applying to UWC, I thought UWC was heaven on earth, right? Like I get to go to school with 90 people from 90 different countries. I didn't even know about the IB until I kind of knew, but it was like the IB. I thought it was going to be a 2-year-long summer camp kind of thing. And, partially it was, right? Like, I think of it, now I'm in college and I'm like, dang, I wish I could go back to staying up until 3 a.m. talking with someone from, wherever. And so it kind of was a utopia, a utopian society, right? But with that comes some disadvantages, right? With that comes the fact that students have to leave their respective campuses and go into the real world, which is not utopic, it's not ideal, it is racist, it is sexist, it is whatever, right? And so there are some pros and cons of that utopian approach. And so for me, I want to criticize and contextualize those, right? And see if we can find a balance between a utopian approach and a realistic approach. And then the colorblindness versus affirmative action. I think, and I'll get into this in the next slide, but UWC largely employs a colorblind approach to diversity, right? If you think of in our mission statement, we say we are celebrating difference. Well, what does that mean, right? Difference is like saying tomatoes to oranges, right? But what does that mean when it comes to like race, right? When it comes to the sort of implications of race on our campuses, but also in the larger world, right? So it's not just good enough to say we're celebrating differences. 50 years ago, coming out of, a post-war, being in a post-war era, sure, that might have flown, and really, I don't think that would have flown 50 years, but let's say it would, right? Right now, it is not enough. And so the colorblind response and approach that we have needs to be problematized, and it needs to be addressed. And sort of looking at affirmative action, right? Like, what could we benefit from that? By taking note of race, right, in everything we do, right, centering that and looking at the nuance, the particular needs of students of color in UWC and addressing them. So one of the ways in which I think we might be able to do this or start looking at fixing this is this idea of celebration of difference versus DEI, right? Diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so I touched on this already. The sort of celebration of difference is what I call a passive anti-racist strategy, right? It's not good enough. It says, oh yeah, I don't care if you're black, brown, pink, or yellow. I'm gonna love you the same. Well, I am black, and I want you to love me and take into consideration the nuances of my blackness, right? I don't just want you to say, oh, you are Jordon, right? Because being Jordon is being black. It's a part of who Jordon is, right? And by you just saying, oh yeah, I'm gonna celebrate your difference, well, celebrating my difference isn't going to stop a police from brutalizing me, right? It definitely didn't stop George Floyd from being murdered. He didn't die, he was murdered, right? There's a power in the words that we use, right? He was killed. And so the words that we use, right? The celebration of differences versus equity, versus inclusion, right? That says something. So I want some active anti-racist strategies to be employed in UWC. Talked about the celebration of differences versus DEI. A part of this is choosing and implementing the most effective response to race and racism. And I honestly don't think UWC knows how to do this. And so let's jump in. One of the ways we can do this is by having greater and better race education. I received no race education during my UWC, right? None. And then I got to the United States and I was bombarded. I got here in 2017. Charlottesville had just happened. It was happening when I got to the US, right? I was 2 months later, I was profiled by a police officer walking from the grocery store. And in my head, I'm like, wait, what? Like my dad was a cop. You know, I went to UWC and everyone was so happy and on cloud nine. And then here, all of a sudden, I'm a Black man, I'm a criminal, I'm a thug, right? I wasn't prepared for this, right? Because UWC didn't teach me. And so I think one thing that we need to do if we think of these active anti-racist strategies is evaluate UWC race education. There's obviously a need for it. The Facebook group showed that there was a need for it, right? And it showed that Black alumni and POC alumni were not satisfied with the sort of passive response. It was reactionary, right? And I think if UWC had, you know, if we had a long-standing sort of race education, sort of responses to racism, more Black alumni and more alumni of color would be more recipients, would be more receiving of that sort of apology. And a part of this comes with the implementation and execution. At UWC, our RBC, we did not have Black, like there was no Black faculty, right? Definitely no Black professors, no Black teachers, right? And we had one, but he left during my second year. And so we had other POCs, you know, but we didn't have a Black student, a Black teacher or Black staff, but yet still almost quarter of our population, student body, was Black, right? And so I'll get into why that matters, but sort of looking at the classroom, right? How do you teach? I know tomorrow we're going to talk about the curriculum, but like, who is teaching? Right? Who is teaching the curriculum? Who are students seeing, right? What sort of mentorship are they receiving? So that's the classroom. And then co-curricular wise, right? Like I went to Germany, you know, for my CAS, I was mostly interacting with white German students, right? And at this, Kathryn mentioned, right? At this developmental stage in my life, right? Not having that sort of external community of Blackness around me really affected me, right? It affected who I considered to be a friend, who I considered to have power, who I considered authority, right? All of these things. And then training in racial education, right? Got none. And not just for students, but for staff, right? There were some staff who were like just oblivious to like, you know, race relations, right? In particular, my European teachers were just like, you know, like who, what, when? And I was like, oh, right? And so that too, I think is gonna be a big component of it. So this part is the big part that jumps out to me. You know, there's this mantra going around, representation matters. It matters who we have in parliament. It matters who we have in jobs. It matters all of these things. But for UWC, it seems to not have mattered, right? And so for me, increasing mentorship of color is going to be key to any discussion about anti-Blackness. And from, you know, this is another disclaimer, I'm centering Blackness in this discussion, right? I'm a Black man, right? I'm not any other racial category. And so I'm centering that Blackness in this discussion, not prioritizing, but centering that, because that's my experience. And so a part of increasing this mentorship of color is envisioning a racially diverse staff at all UWCs, right? Right now I hear that, oh, this UWC has 3 POCs or 3 Black teachers. Mine has none. Mostar has none, right? And it seems like it's a free-for-all, right? But if we could reach a universalizing of a racially diverse staff for all UWCs, I think that will help to like really start to fix a lot of our problems, right? And a part of this is evaluating application pools. I remember when I raised the question of why don't I have a Black teacher at RBC, I was told that, you know, we don't have Black people applying. And I'm like, okay, you're in Germany. Germany has Black people, right? But like, let's just say I'm gonna accept the excuse that you're in Germany and you don't have a lot of Black people. We have white professors, all from the UK, all from Canada, all from the US. Why aren't you also expanding that sort of application pool to ensure that you can have Black teachers, right? Even if not from Germany, even if not from Europe, right? You do it for other professors, for other teachers, why not for Black folks? And so evaluating the application pool, and you know, I'm not necessarily one for quotas, but like if it takes a quota to have to fix this problem, well, sign me up, right? So if requiring a certain number of racially diverse teachers and other staff members, I am fine with that. Because what this does, it affects students of color, right? So when we think of mentorship of color, I grew up in RBC to only ever see a good professor as a white professor, right? And it messes with you. I'm sure you've all heard about the white savior mentality, right? For a while, I've only now started to like dismantle that, right? But for a while, I did not respect faculty of color, because I'm like, well, if you're Black, you obviously, you know, you couldn't teach, because that was my high school experience, right? And so dismantling that white savior mentality when it comes to who students of color can look up to. Who do we have as role models, right? Personal tutors of color for students of color, right? You still get that diversity, but you have someone who can speak to the nuances of being a Black person or a person of color in academia, right? Which now I'm in academia and I am struggling, right? And so the mentorship of color part is gonna be important. And then something that was born out of the Facebook page is this discussion about, you know, oh, the US versus the non-US, right? And people seem to say, oh, you can't say we have racism because we aren't the US. And I just want to sort of say that is nonsense, right? If you think of anti-Blackness and racism are universal, right? And let's think about it. In the history of race relations, race was a European creation, right? So if anyone is racist, it is Europe, right? Europe sort of defined who was Black, who was white, and the hierarchy, right? And so then they exported it, right? So if we historicize race, we will know that it's not good enough to say, oh, the US is racist, we aren't racist, right? We are all racist. We were born into a racial society, but it doesn't mean that we have to continue to be racist. And that's where race education comes in, right? That's why it's so important to have good, effective race education, which currently UWC is failing at. It's also good to delocalize race and racism, right? And a part of this is giving ear to students of color experiences with racial discrimination. I was told, like Yola, that, oh, this would split the community. I was told that we don't want students to feel like they're being attacked. And these students are white students, right? I was told all of this. I was told it was not the right time. And if you are Black or you're a student of color and you've brought up this, I'm sure 6 out of 10 you've probably heard some similar responses, right? But I was told this, and what that made me do, I really kind of went into my corner. Sure, I talk about it to, you know, my African and other Caribbean classmates, but I would just shut up, right? I just didn't talk about it. I got so sort of hushed. I was so used to being hushed. And so I didn't talk about it.
Jordan, you have 1 minute left. You hear?
Perfect. And so giving students the tools to identify and call out racism is going to be very important. And a part of this is identifying microaggressions, right? And knowing that the N-word is not just an American thing, it is all over. So I don't care if you're in Europe, don't say the N-word, right? If you're not a Black person, if you don't have that history, don't say it, right? It's easy to not say, in fact. The last part is Davis scholarships, and sort of looking at the way in which this plays. Most of us, I'm a Davis scholar, right? But there's a gap with the Davis, right? Like, I love Uncle Shelby. I'm benefiting from his wealth right now. Praise the Lord, I love him. But when we think of it, 48% of Black alumni go to colleges in the United States, right? But more than 50% of Davis scholars schools are PWIs in rural towns and conservative states, right? And so when you put these Black alumni in these schools, what are their experiences like? Currently, there are no historically Black colleges or universities that are Davis schools, right? And so that's also a problem. And then the last thing is just giving more, you know, choices for Black alumni, you know, not to just feed into the university or college pipeline, but like, I wanted to take a gap year. I couldn't. I didn't understand what was a gap year. My mom definitely didn't understand what was a gap year. And so giving people more opportunities. And I think my time's up, so that's my presentation. Thank you.
Jordan, I think everybody wants to clap for you, honestly. You all can clap, even though your mic is off. Clap. That was really, really great. Really, really great, Jordan. Thank you so much for that. I mean, Tamaita said you're going to be amazing, but now I've seen it for myself. Very good. I really appreciated it. And I think everybody here appreciated it. I love the different suggestions that you had in terms of education. And Rebecca and her team will be going into education more in depth at tomorrow's series. So tomorrow's talk, check it out, guys. Please tune in for tomorrow. But I really liked the suggestion about the faculty, having a bit more diversity in faculty, because when I remember back, looking back, I think we had one Black person. We had other people of color, but one Black person. And I remember all the Black students, even though we weren't all taught by the person, we thought, protect him at all costs. It's the one, it's just so, it's so important to see somebody that looks like you in that particular position. You feel like it more feels a bit like home, because you've been taken out of home into a whole other situation. So, but I don't want to ramble on. We could all ramble on, but I want to introduce a poll to you guys. We're gonna take a 1 minute, just a little break, 1 minute, no more than 1 minute, to just answer the questions. It really should take about 2 seconds. I think Sarah's gonna share with everybody. Right, so just do the poll for me, and then we're gonna go into the question section. This is completely anonymous, everybody. Your name will not go anywhere near this, okay?
Whose definition of racism?
Adam? Whose definition of racism is that what you said?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yes. Well, the one that Jordan just explained, the systematic definition of racism.
Just give it a few more seconds there. You can see 70% of people have voted.
Mm-hmm.
Just take a little while for the votes to collect.
Somebody's asking to share the poll again.
Can't share it while it's ongoing, but I'll be able to share the results. Sorry, I could relaunch it later, but we're at 80% of people have voted. Should I end the poll? Some people may choose not to vote. Okay.
I think so. Mm-hmm.
Now I'll end the poll and share the results. Can people see the results? Okay.
Okay. Alrighty, Jordon, as a presenter, would you like to just tell us what you think of the results?
Sure. I think the results, first of all,
sorry, disclaimer, we were going to have the race aspect as well, maybe to tell you say what race you were, what race category you're in, but we weren't able to correlate, so it didn't quite make sense, so we just went with this simplified poll. Okay, go ahead, Jordon.
I think several things here. I think one, the fact that almost 30% of people said they have had these experiences with race is a lot. I also think the fact when you think of UWC and who you think of who goes to UWC, the predominant racial racial person, it's usually white folks, right? So at least in Germany, we had 50, because of German laws, we had 50% of the school having to be Germans, right? And so white people obviously aren't going to experience racism, definitely not anti-Black racism, the ways in which Black folks will. And Black folks make up a minority of UWC. So I think those discrepancies in the data speak to the fact that, just the type of bodies who go to UWC. But anyway, even the people who have experienced racism, that's still a big chunk of our alumni population, right? I mean, if one person experiences racism, that's too many, right? And so this speaks to the fact of why we need race education, speaks to the fact of why we need, some sort of racial change in UWC as an organization and movement. So that's what I'd have to say about the polls.
Thank you so much, Jordon. I know it's a very simplified poll. It's pretty simple. We would have wanted, obviously, to have a bit more correlations and stuff, but this was a good conversation piece. And in terms of, as you said, if one person experiences racism, then it's one too many. And I just wanted it to be a visual to highlight that I suspected quite a few people may just say yes, just to highlight and see. It's one thing for somebody to say that there is racism, but maybe sometimes numbers help to put a visual to it, I wanted to ask a few questions about two other panelists. Thank you so much, Jordon. I wanted to ask Kathryn. Kathryn, you spoke. I know your background is in psychology. Given your personal experiences, and which I'm sure other people of color have had similar experiences in the past, is there any impact on mental health at all? And if so, what would you suggest we could do going forward to combat that for the current students and students in the coming years at UWC?
There we go. Okay. That's an interesting question because it obviously can affect people's mental health, but it's not, strictly speaking, a mental health question. And so, for example, I went back to Atlantic College several years ago. I was considering going back there to work, and I was going as a PhD in education, and as a school psychologist and as a developmental psychologist. And I was assured that things are great, that mental health at Atlantic College was being covered much better than it had been. And I met the therapists, and they were very nice. The problem is that it's not a mental health problem. It's a social problem that can have mental health impact. And one of the difficulties, I think, of being a student of color attending a UWC is that mental health staff are unlikely to be POCs. And so when you talk to them, it's going to be filtered through a lens of someone who doesn't get you. You can suffer depression, you can suffer anxiety as an offshoot of racism, and then you go and talk to these people and they're going to devalue you just the same as everyone else at the school, because they don't know, like they haven't had the experiences. They don't know like the embodied experience of being Black, like and how it feels to be trudging through that minefield like every single day.
So you're suggesting kind of like Jordon that we probably need to diversify the staff that deals with counseling and that sort of thing?
Well, what I would prefer to do, like myself, is to have a network of mentors who can address these issues. I think that having a network of Black alumni who students could students could look at people's backgrounds, they could look for commonalities, they could look for interests, and say, like, I would like to speak to someone from America. I would like to speak to someone from who's come from a background which is largely Black into a largely white situation, and so not to be stuck with one person, because I don't think one person of color can represent the entire diaspora. And so what I would much rather do would be like to make available students with a whole range of experiences. So I'm Black. I'm thinking about going to school in Oklahoma. What do you think about that? I'm thinking about going to medical school. I'm thinking about going to an Ivy League, or I'm a Black American. I've been impacted by all these happenings in my country. I'm overwhelmed. I just want someone with a common background to get through. We have to take advantage of the fact that we are this huge network, and that there's a huge body of support that we're just not tapping into. And as long as people are being colorblind and sort of thinking, oh no, it's okay, we've got like mental health staff on campus, they can look after you. Generally, like my overwhelming experience in the mental health field, both going to see therapists myself and sharing with students, is that you need someone who gets you. And you can't rely like on any one person to provide that for you. You have to be able to look. And I'm sure that we could do that, that we could make that happen. And it doesn't take someone with a mental health background to be able to reflect and share and mentor on the Black experience. Like, it's two pretty different fields and cups of tea. And a lot of it really does depend on personal experience and gained wisdom.
Thank you so much, Kathy. I think that's an excellent idea, making use of the diaspora. And it's so true now. One person cannot provide for the needs of all people of color in that particular area. I think what I would like to do is probably put all the different suggestions. Jordon made some good suggestions. Kathryn, you've made a good suggestion. Maybe what we can do is put these together in the document there. I think there was a document where we could add our suggestions at the end of this that would be made available to the public. I don't know if you want to just explain that there quickly.
Yeah, I had one more thing that I wanted to say.
Okay, sorry, go ahead, Kathryn.
And I let you just take a couple of minutes. Is that I love bibliotherapy, and I think that most of us do. For a long time, Martin Luther King was my buddy. James Baldwin, Ta-Nehisi Coates, like all of these. Sometimes you need to get into it, and you need to be able to wrestle with these minds, with these people, and people are at different stages evolution, like along their own path as a person of color, you know, very much depending on your background, like on your particular needs. And you need a library. Like you need someone who is like a mentor in that way. And that's something that should be available at every single UWC. And what I think is that as part of the history and literature curriculums, that students from many countries just have the option of spending a good chunk of time like looking into their own heritage, like and looking into the into the key authors in their own background, and for that to be built into the curriculum, so it's not, and so that it's seen as an essential part of your development, and not like an extra that you have to fight to like make time and energy for. Like, and again, if you're having those shifts in curriculum, you can network with other students in other campuses who are interested in the same things, reading the same books, and have those like really, really important discussions where you get into it, like, and maybe you're sharing personal things that come out as a result of reading these books. And the book should be chosen by POC and by alumni, not by the administration, like, and not by people who are kind of guessing, oh, maybe, you know, what's the classics? No, we need to make those choices, and to have some kind of authority and say in the literature that's provided to 16 and 17-year-olds coming into this environment that we've lived and reflected on for years. Okay, I'm done.
I agree with that 2000%, Kathryn. Thank you so much for that. I'm actually making notes, and I think we'll put these together in a document. I wanted Sarah, could you just let everybody know about the document that we're putting together?
Sure. So Tamaisha actually started a document that's a working document, hopefully as the result of these talks, because we're having a lot of productive conversations, and so people can contribute to it. And it'll take a little while after the 3 talks are done, but we'll send out an email to the people who attended the 3 of them, including this doc, which we'll link now, but which will send this doc and the recordings of the talks, and like other things that come up, other resources that come up, like Christine from the talk yesterday gave a nice list of resources for reading, these kind of things. So we'll send a follow-up email with all of this, but for now, this working doc, you're welcome to comment on and give your suggestions, opinions, anything you hear here. And this was started by Tamaisha, so not taking any credit for that.
Great. Thank you so much, Sarah. Yola, I just wanted to ask a question of Yola, and then we'll open the floor to questions. I know we're a little over time. We have like 12 minutes left, but you all want to stay, right? And chat with us. So I just want to ask Yola, the powerhouse. I wanted to ask you, Yola, you had a different experience, or expressed a different experience from the other 2 panelists. And it sounds like, I wish it had been better, and you gave a few suggestions. I was wondering if you may be able to like just elaborate on what you think could have been put in place to help you to be more prepared for your experience there, and what you think could be done to change the experience there for other students at your school and other schools in general.
Is this a question for me? Sorry, I just had to log out quickly because my bad.
No problem. It's for you specifically. I didn't want you to feel like I left you way in the back. You're a panelist.
Oh, I'm sorry. Could you please repeat it? Sorry, I had to come back in very quickly because the Wi-Fi wasn't working very well.
No problem. I was saying that I know that your experience was less than ideal, and I wish it wasn't so. But I was wondering if you may be able to just give a few suggestions going forward. What you think would have maybe made you better able to be mentally prepared for what you're about to go into, and what you would suggest could be would cause meaningful change for the students that are there now and that will be going there in the future. What would you suggest, just so that we can add it to our list of suggestions?
Yeah, I think one very important thing that is severely lacking is that when you get accepted by the national committee and they tell you which UWC that you've got, no one really tells you what to expect and how your identities will be affected by the environment around you. I know for a fact that Mostar is not a very LGBTQ friendly place. It's not very friendly to people of color, especially to Black people. So having like a document also for all UWCs like presented to the students when they get accepted, that this is what's going to happen, and having like being able to give students a choice, have them be able to say, no, this is not like an experience that I want to have anymore, considering all of these bad things that are going to happen, because for sure they are going to happen. So I think that like level of, that's not necessarily like preparedness, but at least we were aware, because I feel like I was just like a fish out of water thrown into Mostar. I did not know what was happening. And that for me would have been really good. But another thing would be just, again, with the languages and like learning and like, especially in English, I think it's very important that the set list, that the books that we read, I remember in my English classes, we read so many white men. I was so tired that another student and I, we literally had to fight to ask our teacher to teach things fall apart. We literally had to fight to get one book by one Black person. And this book was supposed to represent the whole of Africa, apparently. But yeah, so I guess like representation in what we learn, and within history too, because within the history curriculum, and I don't know how much we can influence the IB, but it is so one-sided. And I know that UWC, we all think of ourselves as like these objective people and we're here to learn about everything, but no one ever learns about our history. Till this day, I still had people coming up to me in UWC Mostar wondering why I spoke English so well. Well, colonization. Or why do I speak Dutch? Again, colonization. Like, just like this history, like you already know that it's lacking in your home country, and you expect UWC to be able to fill in those gaps and try to be as objective as possible, but that's just something that's not happening. So yeah, I would say representation, changing the curriculum so it's more representative and it's actually more factual, because I think another thing with like the representation and like how many white men I had to read, I can always read Oscar Wilde, but how often am I going to read Frantz Fanon? Many people here, I'm pretty sure, don't even know who Frantz Fanon is. So I think that would be very, very important. Yeah. Oh, sorry. And one last thing is that when we're applying to universities, I know it seems as if there's like this hierarchy of like, what is the best of like where you should go, and like different parts are like, there seems to be like this hierarchy. It's like, oh, it's like top of the list, you have to go to a university either in the UK or in the US. And then after that, just go to other universities in Europe. Or then you take a gap year through Global Citizen Year, or you do semester at sea, and then the last resort is going back home. And it seems as if that, like, for example, if you're a British student saying, I just want to go back home, that's fine. But if I, as a South African, say, I want to go back home, people will not know what to do with me. And it seems as if there are no options for me if I want to go home. And it seems as if like the places that I'm from are just, they're not good enough. It seems as if I've just wasted my UWC opportunity if I want to go home. And if I want to, again, be around people who understand me, but then I'm forced into this like pipeline of Western education as if that's the best. And that's always like the greatest thing in the world. And newsflash, it is not. So yeah, those are my suggestions.
Thank you so much, Yola. Those are really good suggestions. I knew you'd come with some good stuff. I had my pen working hard on the paper there. But we're going to put that together in the document. I think that's a really, really good point. I find I've identified with pretty much every single speaker, which means then that I'm sure a lot of people that have attended here today, especially the people of color, would have felt like they identified with every single speaker, because it wasn't specific. They were pretty general, but they were pretty powerful. And I really appreciate the perspectives, the different perspectives that all three of you guys gave today. You were very vulnerable. You opened up yourself and you spoke about something that was particularly difficult, and that should be really applauded, honestly. I want to open up the floor to questions. They were saying there was somebody that wanted to ask a question. Now, before I open, we cannot use any derogatory terms. We want to refrain from any shouting or anything like that. I doubt you guys would shout. We're very civilized here. But, you know, we want to refrain from that. And I also want us to refrain from using specific names and specific titles, because if we name somebody and they're not here to defend themselves, that's not particularly fair either. Alrighty, so who's the first person, Celia?
I think
Sorry.
Joe had a question.
Leo, do you want to
Yes,
say,
hi.
oh, and please say, when you say your name, say which UWC you went to and who you want the question to go to.
Hi, so I'm Leo. I went to UWC Mostar from 2014-16, sent by the French committee, and I'm still really involved in the selection and induction process of the French National Committee. And I have some remarks and comments first to Kathryn and Yola, and then a question to, in a sense, Jens Walterman, who I've seen is on the call. But first, my comment to Kathryn and Yola. So Yola's courier, Lina, from the French committee, and I have been working just very recently to include two things in the French National Committee. First of all, it's the network of peer supporters, which are alumni, which we want to train, have trained from psychologists, so that we have a network that any student that we send to UWC can contact, see which one they want to talk with, according to different experiences and backgrounds, to get some help that is not present at the UWC. And at the same time, what we want to start at the UWC French Committee is that every student at the end of their second year fills out a really kind of detailed form with a lot of questions about what their lived experience at UWC, so that kind of gets compiled into a little document for each UWC that the selection committee particularly reads when they decide which student to send where. Very recently, just last year, the French National Committee sent a student of color to Mostar, and especially knowing what Yola had experienced there, Lina and myself and a few others were very kind of wondering what went wrong in the communication between students and the selection committees to see that some things that, you know, might be a bit more difficult in terms of allocating students to UWCs might be taken into account, especially by asking recent students. So those are just the two comments I want to make about what Kathryn and then Yola said. And then my question to Jens Walterman is, how do we make sure that these talks are shared with the boards and staff of every UWC that exists? Because I know that UWCs, be it national committees, schools, the international councils, the institutions that have a lot of inertia, they're very slow to change course. And I wonder, especially with such a kind of decentralized network, how do we make sure that this amazing content and these experiences that we've heard today, how do we make sure that everyone actually listens to them and learns from them? Sorry if that was a bit long, but yeah, that's from me. Thanks.
You see, my concern is that obviously there's a lot of people in this conversation. There's a lot of people who are not in this conversation. And as I went back to Atlantic College and David talked and held workshops and had tremendous positive feedback from the students, but not from the administration. Now that's for a reason. And it's because color blindness is something that people cling to because it makes them feel better about themselves. It makes them feel okay. And we need to start having these conversations about why this is not working. Like it sounds on the face of it as though it should be fine, but in practice, it isn't. I see a tremendous job of education and hard work to push back against inertia, because it's not just a ship that's not stopping. It's a ship that does not want to stop. And sorry,
Kathryn, I'm so sorry to cut you, Kathryn. It's just because of time. I feel terrible. I really, really feel terrible, but I do have to kind of wrap up because I don't want the time to get away from us. And do you want to just say really quickly the last little bit that you wanted to say?
I'm at a kind of a loss for words now. I think we can continue this conversation with people who are on this, and because it is you can't solve what's going on at the UWCs with just 1 hour conversation.
Excellent, and that's exactly the point.
Yeah.
That's exactly the point. The thing is that this is an excellent start. I would be remiss to say that this is going to solve everything. Thank you so much, Leo, for your question. So sorry about my pronunciation, so sorry. But yes, I think that, yeah, this is the beginning of the conversation. And tomorrow we're going to go into the whole education aspect, which Rebecca and her team will be going into just now. I wish we could take some more questions, but we are literally right at the end of the time. So I'm just gonna wrap up by saying thank you. Let me turn on the video. Yay! Thank you, everybody. Thank you, UWC-IO, for agreeing to do this. I want to thank the panelists. You guys were amazing. Kathryn, you were a gem. Yola, you're a powerhouse, you're fabulous. Jordon, you're Jamaican, so you're even more fantastic, a joke. You guys were amazing, and it was very refreshing to have an honest conversation, because it's a topic that we tend to try and shy away from because it makes people uncomfortable, and we don't want to make people uncomfortable. But the thing is, change cannot happen without a bit of discomfort. And hopefully this is just the beginning. As we said, we're going to be able to put things, all these different suggestions. It doesn't end here. We're going to add them to the document, the working document that Tamaisha made, right? And you guys can also contribute your questions and suggestions there too. And hopefully this will be the beginning of actual change. Yeah, so this, as I said, just to wrap up, this is not the end all and be all, and this cannot solve all the problems. But I thought that this was really good because I felt like this felt like a safer space and a calmer space for people to express some of their opinions. My dear, I wish we could have had more questions. I'm sorry, but at least it was a start. I don't know if, I think I'm going to have to wrap up there. I would have wanted to give each of the panelists a chance to wrap up. I don't know if you want to say one thing for 1 minute to say bye-bye, and then we all say bye-bye. Jordon.
Yeah, I just thanks everyone for coming and listening. And you know, this is only a conversation starter. It's by no means the end. But I am optimistic that we'll press on. I definitely will, because we all love this movement. So thank you, and take care, be safe, stay healthy.
Yola?
Yeah, thank you everybody for coming and for listening. I think that is one of the most crucial steps that is so underrated, that listening is the first part, because when you speak over people, that's when a lot more harm is done. And to my non-bi POC folks, remember that no one wakes up wanting to be racist, but racism happens when people don't think. It's more so like the banality of evil. It's things that happen in their consequence, but not so much in their intent. So we should always be like checking ourselves.
Excellent. And Kathryn? Just a quick wrap up.
Oh, I know I talk too much. But the thing that I wanted to say at some point was, I know that I know how much the Black experience has, you know, potentially to contribute to the UWC movement. Not only our experiences of racism, but also like the really, really positive things about the values that we develop in this position, and our own sort of cultural strengths. And ultimately, that's where we want to go. You know, like Mandela was a figurehead for the UWC movement for years, but the values that he embodied are something that the world desperately needs, and that student POCs can bring to this movement and contribute, if only people are willing to listen.
Thank you so much, Kathryn. All right, you guys. Thank you so much. It has been a pleasure. And see, it wasn't so bad. It was good, right? See you tomorrow at the talk tomorrow.
Thank you, everyone. Feel free to unmute yourselves and say bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Can you hear me?
Thank you so much.
Thank
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everybody, this has been amazing.
Well done.